people, real talk.
Made to help people in our community in every way. For your girl.
In the healing process, sometimes you have to go back to your past and look at that, address that, in order to actually heal. And if you don't do that, sometimes those things from the past will impact your present and your future, sometimes making it hard for you to trust, hard for you to realize your potential. Think about that. Hello, I'm Beverly Taylor. This is the 411 Live, real people, real talk. Today, my guest is somebody that I have been bugging to get back on this podcast because he's joined us before. It's Reggie Jackson. He's the co-owner of Nurturing Diversity Partners. He's a lecturer, a writer, a historian, and so much more. Welcome, Reggie.
Thank you, Beverly. Good to be back.
It is great to have you back. Also, I want to congratulate you because I was looking at the Milwaukee Press Club finalists and I saw this name, Reggie Jackson. I said, I wonder, is that Reggie? And then I saw it was for Best Column and I saw the title of the column and I said, yes, that's Reggie. Because the title of, How Our Whitewashed History Fuels a Path from Hate Speech to Violent Mass Shootings. And I was like, that's Reggie.
That was me.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I have to tell you that like I said, I've been bugging you because you were supposed to be on the podcast last November and you had a stroke, which shocked me, shocked a lot of people, and a lot of people were concerned about you. So I'm so glad to have you here and so glad to see you doing well.
Thank you.
That must have been a shocker for you, huh?
It was. It came as quite a surprise. Fortunately, my wife was with me when it happened, and she forced me to go to the emergency room. I just told her, I said, I just feel kind of tired. I'm just going to go home and, get some rest. And she was like, we're going to get you behind to the hospital. So, I listened.
Yeah.
And, went to the hospital, and they told me right away, yeah, you had a stroke. And they kept me there for 3 days. Wow. Doing some, some testing and, no real treatment right away, but just looking at, the condition of my brain and, how it impacted my body. Fortunately, it wasn't a really major stroke. It was a pretty minor stroke. I mean, no stroke is really, really minor.
Yeah.
But the damage that it caused wasn't anything significant. There was no paralysis. It just impacted the strength on the left side of my body and made my voice, not the voice that I'm accustomed to hearing. So that's the biggest struggle I've had is just, getting my voice strong again. But my body feels great. I've lost a lot of weight.
Yeah, you
Made
have.
some lifestyle changes. Eating a lot better, Beverly. My wife and I are both so much healthier now. And my body feels the best it's felt in years.
Yeah. Now health is taking a priority, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I said last November, and just talking to you now is because we were waiting for that voice to get stronger. So progressively, it has gotten stronger.
It has. It's still, a ways to go. Yeah. But, it's stuff that I work on every day to strengthen it. It'll take a little while before it gets back to where I want it to be. But, it's significantly stronger now than it was even a few weeks ago.
We were talking before, there's so many people that I know who have had strokes, and relatively young people. And you were mentioning nationwide, that's a huge number of people who have strokes annually. What did you say, 800,000?
About 800,000 Americans have strokes every year.
That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Did they give you any indication of maybe why or what led to it, or do they even know?
There were a couple things that were related to the stroke that I had. One was the fact that I have type 2 diabetes, which runs in my family. And also, one of my arteries was clogged with cholesterol. And that was the main cause of the stroke, was the cholesterol blocking one of the arteries in the right side of my brain. Was like severely clogged. It's still clogged, but it's a lot better than it was. And I'm actually going for another examination and procedure for them to take a closer look at that artery in early May. but they did an MRI on me about a month ago, and they said, "Oh, it's a lot better than it was, Reggie.
Nice.
You made some really good progress."
That's
So
wonderful.
our bodies heal themselves, and I've done a lot of things to change. Just the way I treat my body. I got some really good advice from a friend of mine, Beverly. He said, "Listen, Reggie, we have to treat our bodies as if we're in a relationship with our bodies." And he said, if it's an abusive relationship, then it'll end up like other abusive relationships. So don't be abusive to our bodies anymore. So I've been very careful and cautious about, what I do
Yeah.
in terms of what I eat, eating a lot healthier, eating things that are good for my body instead of things that are not good for my body. I've been exercising on a regular basis. And, it's all of the things that my therapists, worked through with me, physical, occupational, and speech therapists. They really did a fantastic job pushing me. And so I'm feeling really good.
So, Reggie, as I'm talking to you, inside, I'm just like, uh-oh. Because the last time my physical, the cholesterol was high. So I'm thinking, okay, I've got to do something. I have to make that a priority to get that down. So, by you and your willingness to share, you're encouraging people to take action and take their health seriously. So
Yeah,
I thank you.
it's something that we take for granted. We can't really see inside of our bodies to know what's going on. But, I advise everybody to make sure that you check in with your doctor, get an annual physical, get that blood work done to see where your numbers are. And if there's something that's an issue, make sure that you get whatever help you need. Otherwise, it could end up a situation like mine.
Absolutely.
Just out of the blue, out with my wife and mother-in-law, enjoying a nice sunny day. And next thing you know, I'm driving and I got lost. I never get lost. I got lost. And my wife was like, "There's something wrong with you, Reggie." I'm like, "No, I'm okay." And then we went out to eat. And my mother-in-law and my wife were both like, "Reggie, there's something wrong. You're not being yourself." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm myself." They're like, "No, you're being like really quiet and you're not saying anything." I'm like, "I'm just kind of tired." So that's what I felt. I didn't feel anything other than just, I felt a little tired that day, Beverly. And finally, my wife was like, "I think you need to go to the hospital." And I was like, "No, I actually went upstairs when we got home and I got on the treadmill."
Oh,
My
wow.
wife was like, "Get your butt off of that treadmill. What are you doing? Are you crazy?" So I got off the treadmill immediately, and she said, "We're going to take you to the ER." So we drove to the ER, and they admitted me right away and kept me in the hospital for 3 days. I was in the ICU unit for 2 days.
Oh, wow.
And, they finally released me to go home that Friday. And it was such a pleasure to be home. And I tell people that you never really know how much people care about you until, there's a crisis in your life. And I had so much just support from my family, friends, neighbors, everybody coming by. I mean, that first 2 weeks I was home, Beverly, I didn't have to prepare a meal. Everybody was bringing me food like almost every day, which was just so generous
Oh,
of people.
nice. Yeah.
And my father and I have never had much of a relationship. He lives in Detroit. He drove over from Detroit to spend some time with me.
Oh, wow.
And that ended up being like really, really positive for me. I was able to talk to him more about, the things I've been doing with my life and show him some of the awards I've received and showed him a couple videos of me, speaking publicly. And for the first time in my life, he said, "Son, I'm really proud of you." Oh, wow. I was like, "You know how long I waited to hear you say that?" So that was really like an important moment for me. But my support system was good. And so throughout this journey, this recovery journey, I've had a really strong support system. My wife, my mother, friends, family.
Yeah.
It's really critically important. So, people don't realize that you have to keep, relationships with people that will take care of you in a time of need. Don't burn those bridges. You may be mad at somebody, but don't kick them out of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep people in your life because you never know when you're going to need them.
Yeah. Yeah. Good advice. Good advice. So, at the intro, I was talking about delving into the past, looking at the past so you can move towards a brighter future. And the reason why I brought that up is because of the Redress movement that you're involved in. And it is, it's kind of a way of, I look at it as healing, really. Tell me a little bit about Redress Movement and how you're involved in it.
So I joined the Redress Movement officially last year. I was hired as a member of the research team. It's a national organization that launched in 3 cities initially: Charlotte, North Carolina, Denver, Colorado, and Milwaukee. And the Redress Movement is a Black-led organization committed to leading a multiracial movement that empowers communities to take direct action to redress racial segregation. And, we've all heard Milwaukee's the most segregated place in the country. So, we're the poster child for segregation in many respects. And so the Redress Movement works in deep partnership with local communities to repair the harm caused by intentional policies to segregate communities. And we do our work by educating, and not only educating, but also mobilizing communities and shift the narrative about how we became segregated and the impact of that. And then winning redress victories. So holding people accountable for creating the segregation that we have and the negative impacts of that is really an important part of what redress is trying to do. And our starting point is housing, but we work in solidarity with others who are working on, social justice issues and redressing harms of the past. It's really important. As you said, the past really is something that we have to address. We can't just continue to ignore the ugly parts of American history because they're still impacting us on a daily basis, even if we don't see it or recognize it.
I can see why Milwaukee was chosen. You said 3, and I can see why Milwaukee was chosen. Because as you mentioned, typically when people think of Milwaukee, they think of segregated city. And when you talk about home ownership, the imbalance is off the chains. I think it was I read something like 27 point something % of Blacks owning their homes, where 70% of whites owning their homes. So there are a lot of reasons for that. You go back to the redlining and all of those different things. So is all of that being addressed?
Yeah, all of those things are. So, one of the first things that we started to do as a research team was to look into the history of segregation, the specifics of each of those communities. And we wrote up a document we call a story map of each of the 3 cities. Each of the cities has segregation issues, but they're different in Denver and Charlotte than they are in Milwaukee. But in each of those 3 communities, there were groups of people that were working towards, doing something about the segregation policies and practice that had damaged those communities. So that's why the 3 cities were chosen, because there was a history already there, people doing some work initially, and they wanted to just kind of come in and support those people that were doing the work, build coalitions with folks. And so when we think about Milwaukee, the Black population in Milwaukee has the 2nd lowest Black home ownership rate of the 50 largest cities in the country. The only city worse than Milwaukee is Minneapolis at 25%, Milwaukee at 27%.
Wow.
And nationwide, over 40% of Blacks are homeowners. So we're way, way behind the national average for Blacks. But we, as a nation, we haven't made much progress since the 1968 Federal Fair Housing Act was passed. We just celebrated the anniversary of that recently. But we haven't made a lot of progress. The Black home ownership rate back then was just a little over 40%, and it's still just a couple points over 40% today. So we still have a long way to go.
Right. Because even though that's higher than Milwaukee, that's still low.
Very low.
It's
very
still
low.
low. So who are you bringing to the table? Who will be brought to the table in Milwaukee to deal with this?
So we've been working very closely. One of my colleagues here is Dynasty Caesar. She's a field organizer from Milwaukee. And what Dynasty has been doing is reaching out to people in the metro Milwaukee area, within the city of Milwaukee, suburbs, exurbs, people that are doing work related to, educating people about the history of segregation, and also people who want to see some positive changes happen, people who understand that, this long period of decades and decades of segregation have created some real problems, and they want to get past those. So, community organizations, foundations that are interested in doing work to help out. We're working with a variety of different institutions, trying to bring a coalition of people together. One of the organizations we're working with is called RON, Rebuilding Our Neighborhoods. They've been really, really working hard, working on, affordable housing
that's
issues
huge.
here.
Yeah.
Working with the Sherman Park Neighborhood Association as well, and multitudes of other organizations. So there's some great, groups out in the suburban communities that are doing some work. Bay Bridge is one of those organizations. Another is Bridge the Divide, which is based in Cedarburg. So we've had a lot of support from a lot of different, community-based groups that have been looking at segregation issues for a while and really want to make a difference. So it's really about building that collaborative effort among everybody.
Very good. Very good. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about what Redress Movement is all about. I'm with Reggie Jackson. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Where did the time go? I don't know how I got here. Ooh.
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Get it, slip it, cuff it, check it. Talk to doctor now and share it.
Get it, slip it, cuff it, check it. High blood pressure silently affects millions of Americans. Staying on top of your blood pressure is as simple as these 4 easy steps. Self-monitoring is power. Visit manageyourbp.org to learn more.
Welcome back to the 411 Live. I'm Beverly Taylor, and I'm here with Reggie Jackson, who is a part of the Redress Movement, and Milwaukee is a part of that project. One of the questions that popped in my head was, and you were talking about some of the diverse people, coalitions, and, people who are partnering to make this work, trying to tackle the issues of segregation, which we experience now. But when you talk about looking back to the past of how we got here, is it difficult or easy to address that piece of it? Because, for some, you're talking to people who historically benefited. So how does that conversation go?
Well, it's a challenging conversation because people don't know the history of how we got so segregated. People generally believe that segregation is something that comes naturally. Like, people want to live around people like themselves, but they don't understand the forces behind how we became segregated. So the Redress Movement came out of the work of Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, which documented, the role that the federal government played in creating segregated spaces. And so a lot of people have done book clubs related to Mr. Rothstein's book. And so there's a lot more understanding of how we got segregated. And what it does is when people know the forces, the role that the Federal Housing Administration played, the role that the National Association of Real Estate Boards played, insurance companies, banks, when they realize all of these entities were involved, it's like, okay, so now we know that these weren't just individual so-called bad people. These were institutions that helped to create segregation. And so now that we know that, we can work towards having a conversation about what do we do to change the situation. And these aren't just things that happened in the past. People think about redlining, but, there's modern-day redlining as well. We still have banks that are discriminating against people of color, in particular blacks and Hispanics.
Right.
Huge, differences in terms of people's ability to get a loan to purchase a home. It's still a huge challenge, and even something like getting your home appraised.
Yes, I've
There's
heard of
still
that.
a great deal of bias in that process as well. So I think when people in our suburban communities, hear about, how we got here, it's an easier conversation than you would think, Beverly. I've been having these conversations with people going back to 2016 when I first started doing a presentation I called The Hidden Impact of Segregation, and showing people, how we got segregated, because people didn't know. And once people were educated, they're asking different questions, and the assumptions that they had about how to fix things, change. I always say you can't fix something if you don't know how it's broken to begin with.
Yes.
You have to educate yourselves about the history. And part of what my job is, on the research team for Redress Movement, is to dig into that history. Currently, we're working on looking at the history of the role that the real estate industry played, nationally, but also looking into what that role was here locally in Metro Milwaukee as well. And those things really help us to engage in what the next steps in the process are in terms of looking for some redress victories, holding people accountable. You broke it, you're responsible to help fix it. And there's so much evidence, Beverly. I don't think that people know that it's not really difficult to figure out how we got segregated, because the people that did it, they left so much evidence behind. They were so blatant in their discrimination and racism for decades. They weren't ashamed of it. And they just did it without even thinking twice about it. So there's so much evidence that was left behind that I tell people, like, listen, man, when you look at the evidence, it's very clear that what we have today is a result of intentional discrimination by a variety of different institutions to basically create, home ownership for the white community and deny those opportunities for people in the black community. And as a result, most people's wealth is wealth in their homes. That's the biggest, purchase we'll ever make.
Right.
And so when you talk about the wealth gap in this country, the wealth gap is primarily a gap in home ownership. So you look at a family in Milwaukee back in 1950. I like to use that year because there's data from the Census Bureau that shows that in that year there were about 28,000 people in Milwaukee County that had active mortgages on their homes. And of those 28,000 traditional mortgages from traditional banks, all but 369 were held by whites. So there were literally only 369 people of color that had a traditional bank mortgage in Milwaukee County in 1950. And then when you look at the Federal Housing Administration loans, there were over 5,000 of those, and all of them was held by a white person. 3,000 VA home loans in Milwaukee County, all of them were held by white people. So, when you go back at that time and you think about what was happening in the 1950s, we were coming out of, World War II. People were getting, VA benefits. You were starting to have our suburbs be built, roads be built to get people out to the suburbs. So there was a great deal of growth, and that was probably the quickest pace of new home ownership in American history. And when you look back at what happened, you saw people of color weren't given those same opportunities. And so whites began to build that family generational wealth that they had to pass down to their children and grandchildren years later. But people of color, particularly blacks, were, the door was shut in our face. We didn't have those opportunities. And so we got behind, not because we were negligent and we didn't do certain things. We got behind because we weren't given opportunities to do the same things that whites were. And I always tell people when I go out to our suburbs and exurbs that I use the term, you got to hook up. You got to hook up from the federal government, from the banks, from all of these, entities. They hooked you up and gave you what you have that you think you have because, you worked harder than black people. No, you didn't work any harder. You just had people giving you things that...
Entitlements.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Entitlement. There's a great book that talks about those entitlements, and it's called When Affirmative Action Was White, and it looks at all of these different things that were done that benefited the white community and necessitated communities of color being left out of opportunity. So there's so much that people need to know to understand how we got to where we are. I always tell people that if you don't know the history, then you can't even have a productive conversation about where we are today. You have to learn the history. And we do a poor job of teaching the ugly parts of American history. We leave those out. And we don't really teach local history in schools. So there's so much about the local stories in Milwaukee that once people hear those stories, they're shocked. I remember when I first started doing the presentation, I would show people some of the things that were said, very blatantly said by the Federal Housing Administration in the underwriting manual. They were like, no, they couldn't have said that, Reggie. I'm like, look, this is 1926. They started saying this, and it was in their underwriting manual all the way through the 1950s before they changed the language. They would say stuff that's blatant as, a realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character of persons that will be detrimental to property values, which basically meant, these neighborhoods should stay, if they're all white, they should stay all white. If they're black, they should stay black. And so they steered people to certain neighborhoods and created segregated spaces. But what was most important, Beverly, were the racial restrictive covenants that people began to use that was pushed by the Federal Housing Administration. Said, listen, you're going to build this new subdivision. You're going to attach these covenants to the properties on the subdivision
Right.
that specifically state that the only people that can occupy this space, renters, someone who leases the space, buys a house, whatever, they have to be white. Otherwise, they're not eligible to occupy that space. And those spread like wildfire through the 1930s and 40s and created the all-white spaces that we see in so many places around the U.S.
And I was noticing that, I guess I was reading it somewhere where some folks in Wauwatosa, they're buying their houses and they look and those covenants are still in there. They're illegal, they're not enforceable, but they're still there.
Yeah, so the covenants were attached to the properties, and the way the language they use is that they run with the land. So it doesn't matter who the owner of it is. Once it's on that property, it runs with the next owner and the owner after that and the owner after that. And so they started writing those covenants. I think the earliest one we found was written in, 1915 in Wauwatosa. And many of these were written in the 1920s, 1930s, and they had, a period that they lasted where they were legally binding, say through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, even 70s. There was one in South Milwaukee that was set to expire in 2024. And so what happened in 1948, there was a famous Supreme Court case called Shelley v. Kramer, where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that these racial restrictive covenants can no longer be legally enforced. They said they're constitutional, they're okay, because they're a partnership between, different parties, but they can't be enforced. So you can't have the local authorities come in and remove families because they violated the terms of the covenant. And then finally in 1968, the Federal Fair Housing Act made those covenants completely unconstitutional. And it didn't mean that they were gotten rid of. They're still there. They're still in the paperwork for those properties. Mm-hmm. So I'm part of another project, Beverly, that's looking into discovering where all of these covenants in Milwaukee County were. So the project is called Mapping Racism and Resistance in Milwaukee County. And what we're doing is we're using a protocol developed at the University of Minnesota by a group called Mapping Prejudice. They mapped all the racial restrictive covenants in Hennepin County, Minnesota, and they're using their same protocol to help us, collaborating with us to do it in Milwaukee County.
Oh, wow.
And we know that there are somewhere between 20 and 25,000 racial restricted covenants in Milwaukee County. We're trying to map where each one of those is. We mapped about 2,000 or so far. So we're beginning to get a picture of where they were. And what's interesting and different about Milwaukee versus, say, Minneapolis and some of the other cities where they've been attempting to map the covenants is in Minneapolis. A lot of the covenants were related to not just blacks, but had restrictions on, people of Asian nationality, Jewish families, a variety of different people. But all of the ones that we found so far in Milwaukee County were restricting black families.
Black people. Mm-hmm.
Every single one of them that we found, of 2,000 so far, that we verified that's a covenant for sure.
Wow. Okay. So we're almost out of time. And I knew this was going to happen because you have a wealth of information. But I want you to come back and talk to us about this whole progress that you are making in that. But when we talk about the redress movement, what's the end game?
So the end game is to build local, coalitions of people that are fighting to redress the damage caused by segregation policies and practices, holding people accountable to redress the damage, to do something about, the damage that was done. You can't go back and change the redlining policies and practices from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, but you can do something about the damage that they cause. For instance, we can hold banks accountable. Banks that were discriminating against people, that continue to discriminate against people, we can ask them to do something different, assist in, programs that will make housing more affordable, make it so that people don't have so many barriers in front of them to becoming homeowners. We can hold real estate companies responsible for what they did very blatantly in their they basically said, we're not gonna help black people to purchase homes. We're going to keep them, off to the side. We'll help white people. So we know that these things happen. And, part of what we're going to do is have campaigns where we're going to ask some of these entities to do something to repair some of that damage. There are a lot of things that people can do, but part of it is that it's a coalition of people, multiracial coalition, people from the city, people from the suburban communities working collectively together for the same goals. Because we all want to see, a space where equitable and fair treatment is the norm. And we haven't seen that.
All right. Reggie, thank you for coming. You're going to come back, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Beverly.
Okay,
I love to come back.
We have so much to talk about and so many updates that you can give us. So I look forward to that.
Yeah. Can I give a couple pieces of places people can go to learn more? So if you want to learn more about the Redress Movement and find out how you can become involved in it, you can go to our website. It's redressmovement.org. There's a bunch of information about who we are, what we do, and ways of finding out how you can become involved as an individual or an organization. And then the Mapping Racism and Resistance in Milwaukee County project, what we're looking for are people from the community to help with the project. So the way it works is that we are able to get all of the records from Milwaukee County, recorder of deeds for every property in Milwaukee County. This is like basically almost 3 million pages worth of documents with all of these housing deeds, and have a computer go through those and flag what it thinks may be covenants. But we have to have 5 human beings to verify each one that the computer sees. So we're looking for citizen soldiers to help with the project. They can go to the Mapping Prejudice website, or they can go to the website for Mapping Racism and Resistance. They can sign up to become one of those people that helps to verify the covenants.
Excellent.
Sure.
All right. Now we have our homework, right?
Absolutely.
We can all get involved. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us for another episode. Hey, we are a nonprofit organization, so if you're so inclined, go to our website, the411live.org, and help us out if you would like. We like to bring community issues, interesting people to you, and you will help us do that. Until next time, I'm Beverly Taylor. This is the 411 Live. Real people, real talk. If you would like to check out past episodes, there are many ways. Go to your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Like and watch us on Facebook. Watch and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have suggestions for future episodes, go to our website, the411live.org.